Greetings, friends, and welcome to this edition of Tales from the Tabletop, the video series where I scour the internet and my own personal experiences to bring you anecdotes of adventure, from the tragic to the comical to the highly improbable, from tabletop games of every stripe, from Warhammer to D&D and everything in between. And today's first story comes to us from Anna Marie, and it is called How My House Saved the Day. I was playing as a witch with two other players and the DM. We had been playing various campaigns together for years, but I have never been the best at thinking outside the box. Well, I came face to face with a boss fight we were not prepared for. I was almost out of spells, and the rest of the party was not doing so well. Nothing we had seemed to be working. I look, and one of the spells I had left was Secure Shelter. So I asked if I could cast it slightly above the boss's head. Well, I could, and since it was not the final boss, I didn't have to roll. And the bad guy had no save. So I conjured a 20-foot square stone house just above the mini-boss's head. And that is how the witch turned around and yellow brick roaded her mini-boss. That's a real good one. I like it. And I wanted to tell you that story because it reminds me of another. A buddy of mine told me about a campaign that he was in which one of his party mates kept railing about how the magic system was broken. They were playing, I believe, 3 or 3.5 with some homebrew magic rules. And so the guy who complained about magic decided, I'm going to play a wizard. And he did. And they leveled up, and every time he leveled up, he put all of his points into one spell. No matter what, he had his handful of cantrips, your magic missile and so forth, and this one spell. And he was saving it up. And he had read the rules and read the homebrew so astutely that he had figured out he could cast this spell not infinitely, but a whole lot more than you could usually cast a single spell if he allotted his points right every time he leveled up, which he did. So they found themselves in this dungeon, one of the more famous ones at the time. I can't remember the title of it. Not like one of the big ones, but one of the ones that was like, this dungeon is hard. Party goes through the dungeon, doing their thing, and the wizard is backbenching. He's throwing his magic missile, solving riddles, and saying, you, go over there and get them, and hiding behind the tank and the damage sponge. And this was his strategy until they ran across their very first mini-boss, which was a troll, a great big troll in a very large chamber in this dungeon. And when they reached the mini-boss, all the players were kind of worried because they only had so many hit points and they only had so many heals before they could get to the center of the dungeon where the MacGuffin was. A mini-boss this early in the dungeon spells disaster. If they get their hit points chipped away too much, simple math, they're not going to make it to the center. But the wizard saw his moment to shine. And so he leapt in front of the group and says, don't worry, y'all, I've got this one. I want to cast Summon Animal. DM says, cool, roll for it. What kind of animal do you want to summon? I want to summon a fully grown great white shark directly above the troll's head. I don't think that you're a high enough level to conjure something that big. Check the sheets. Not only can I conjure an animal this size, but I could do it something like 12 times. And so the DM rifled through his stuff and said, yeah, you make your roll. And he made it with ease. And above the head of this fairly large troll was a 21-foot great white shark. And for those of you not in the know, a fully grown great white shark weighs somewhere between 1,500 pounds and 2 tons. And doing the math for how many hit die it's going to take, if he rolled all of his hit die and rolled 1s and 2s on all of them, this troll goes splat. So without rolling damage, splat goes the troll and on goes the party. And the wizard's trick begins. His stunt has gone off, because now every single time they come across a mini boss, which get bigger and badder and stronger as they go, I cast Conjure Animal, Great White Shark, above the monster's head. And his rolls were good. And he kept conjuring, and every single time, splat. Just, they die. Every single mini-boss, with one go, dies. They make it to the center of the dungeon, to the final boss. Now, the final boss requires a team effort and no less than 2 great white sharks falling on its head, but they kill the final boss and get the MacGuffin. I forget what it was. And now, it's the DM's turn to spring his trap. The dungeon was arranged so that it was always an Indiana Jones moment. You get the MacGuffin and then everything starts shaking and you've just got to run. And it's a race to get out of the dungeon before the whole thing crumbles. And there were mechanics for how fast players run and how fast the dungeon is crumbling. The DM took a note of every single shark that was conjured and every single room that they were conjured in. So as the party is running as fast as they can, making athletics rolls to run and sprint and dodge and slide, they come to the first carcass of a great white shark, which is fully dead and is no longer flopping. And he says, a 2-ton great white shark is very big around. Like we're talking like a 500-year-old oak tree, maybe bigger. And they're slippery. It's difficult to get over this animal. Assuming you don't rub the dermal denticles the wrong way. Sharks don't have scales. They have what's called dermal denticles. And, I'm sorry. I watch a lot of deep sea documentaries with my kids, so. They have to roll an athletics check to jump over this shark. And it's not an easy roll. And it's especially not an easy roll for a wizard who dumped all of his points into one spell. And they have to roll athletics to jump every single shark that this wizard had conjured. And they don't always make it. I believe they made it out of the dungeon, but only just. Like true Indiana Jones fashion, they make a flying leap out the last chamber, out the door, just in time for that chamber to crumble. And just that's, to me, that was the funniest story. That's just the perfect thrust and repose, or strike and counter-strike. Magic is stupid and your home rules are dumb, and look how I can just defeat this dungeon so easily by gaming the system. But even your gaming of the system comes with consequences. Roll athletics. Love that story. So happy I finally get to tell people about it. Our next story comes from Dr. Professor Thunder, whose name needs to be inscribed in stone because it is that badass. Dr. Professor Thunder writes, "The first time my group and I ever played D&D, or any tabletop RPG for that matter, I was playing as B.A. Baracus. Yes, from the A-Team. As an aside, B.A. is not just from the A-Team, he is the best member of the A-Team. Him and Murdoch, but only when they're together. I digress. In a combat scenario, I got gutted pretty badly, but not fatally. I was healing up in the townmaster's house, but for some reason, I was butt-ass naked. So I get up in the sheet, walk into the kitchen, and behold, the townmaster's daughter. Cue my sheet falling and Careless Whisper playing somewhere in the background. Just then, guards storm in and they wrestle me outside and into the mud. Fast forward to me explaining my muddy nakedness to the rest of the party, and our cleric puts his head in his hands and says, "By Lythander, B.A. bare ass, it is too much." Later, they tried to cast sacred flame on some moldy beef and ended up burning down the tavern. Our next story comes from Robert Owen, and Robert writes a story called Gnome Juggling. I've had many funny experiences in my many years of DMing, but one of my personal favorites was the gnome juggling. Not gnomes who juggle, mind you, but the actual act of juggling a gnome. I made the mistake, with a particularly creative group, of saying something to the effect of, "You're back in town, and you still have a fair amount of evening to kill before you head out again tomorrow. What would you like to do?" Naturally, they asked what their options were for activities and how much money they had left. The answers were not very much and highly limited, in reverse order. So they decided, clearly, we need to make some money. The group consisted of a bugbear barbarian, a gnome wizard, and a human peasant. Yes, he specifically asked to play a peasant, and that was just one of his odd characters. To make money, they decided to put on a street performance. The gnome wanted to make some dancing lights and perform simple magic tricks, but the other two weren't quite sure how to contribute until the bugbear picked up the gnome and said to the human, "Go long." The gnome was being played by my wife, and I know she would not have been happy with me if I ended up having some sort of tragedy befall her when the human inevitably missed or drops her. So, with much trepidation, I had everyone roll. The bugbear rolled fair, but he didn't need to roll high. The human, my fingers were crossed, but my hopes were not high. Luckily, he actually ended up rolling something like a 19. The gnome, who was trying to perform her magic tricks in flight, rolled high as well, and I had them do this multiple times to keep the show going, and each time their luck held out. So they spent their evening making some fair money, throwing a magical gnome back and forth, while she dazzled an ever-expanding audience. Our next story comes from Robin Powell, and it is called Garden Wall of Grief. During a session of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, the 5 members of our group are attempting to gain access to a mansion where we believe some sort of chaos-related shenanigans will be happening during a party. We've already tried the direct approach of blagging our way into the party, which failed miserably. So, we looked for other options. After a quick trip around the perimeter of the property, we decided our best bet is to scale the garden wall. The garden is very large, and it is very dark out, so we guess that we've got a good chance of being able to approach the house unseen. The wall is 10 feet tall. We have rope and a grappling hook. We're all sturdy adventuring types, so what could possibly go wrong? My friends, you have never in your lives witnessed so many flubbed rolls. We each climbed part way up and fell. Part way up and then fell again. We fell so often that even as we continued to take more and more damage, we couldn't stop. It was simply inconceivable. Inconceivable to us that the next attempt wouldn't work, except they didn't. And many dice went to dice jail for failing us.
You keep using the word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
Eventually, with everyone hovering at around half health, our dwarven runesmith makes it to the top of the wall. I succeed shortly afterwards. flubbed my roll, overbalanced, and fell down into the garden. The dwarf runesmith attempted to catch me, flubbed his roll, overbalanced, and falls down into the garden. This, of course, was quite noisy, and as luck would have it, there were guard dogs about. Hearing barking mixed with panicked cursing from the garden, our companions outside throw a rope over the wall, and I successfully rethrow to grapple from our side before climbing to the top of the wall again. When the runesmith attempted to follow, the rope snapped, and he fell back down. He is now very nearly dead, with a pack of hungry dogs closing fast. He scrambles and jumps while I reach down to grab his hand and haul him up. We're successful, but we overbalance again and fall off the wall again. Luckily, we are now outside the garden, but my hit points are very low, and the runesmith only has a single hit point remaining. Never fear though, our priest of Sigmar is well versed in the healing arts. He tends to the dwarf's injuries, rolls a critical fail, and cripples the dwarf's hands. This means he now lacks the manual dexterity necessary to craft any of his runes. So that's the story of how we lost an encounter with a garden wall. The campaign ran for almost another 2 years. We encountered countless mortal foes, a few immortal, the undead, and a couple of demons. None of them managed to defeat us so utterly as that gosh darn garden wall. This last story is the one that I've been illustrating the whole time, so I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it's worth the wait. This is a kooky one. I like it a lot, and I hope you do too. Here we go. This story comes from Alan, and he writes, "My funniest D&D event occurred in the Keep on the Borderlands, which served since around 1982 as one of the hallmarks of game highs ever since. In those days, when dwarves and elves were classes and races, and halflings were hobbits, wizards might grow to overwhelming heights of arcane power. That is to say, the wizards who survive might. But first level wizards started play with but one spell to cast each day. Survival was not a given. Once that spell was cast, the wizard worried. The rest of the mage's day was supportive roleplay and fending away monsters at the end of a gnarled wooden staff. That was the situation for my character, Gandalf Ford. Yes, Gandalf Ford, the human wizard. There I was, a lone human wizard with his soul magic missile already spent. My company was an axe-wielding dwarf running off in advance of the party, an elf archer type using my character as cover, and a hobbit burglar who was lurking somewhere. Nerves were raw. The dwarf was wounded badly in an earlier encounter with kobolds in the dark, but he refused to leave. Why? Because there's more dark tunnels to explore, clearly. The elf didn't want to be in a dark hole anymore, and he said so repeatedly. He only had a couple of arrows left. I pointed out the limits of my power and recommended a swift, strategic withdrawal, and the burglar remained silent in the dark somewhere. Then, the rats appeared. They came from a huge pile of trash and rotting waste congesting the way ahead. Red eyes reflected our torches, and the chittering of sharp teeth and scraping nails filled the cavern. Rats in their hundreds. Naturally, the dwarf felt certain a charge was needed. The DM made some equivocating noises in response to this plan, which gave the dwarf pause. The elf thought that we should know he still had 1 flask of flaming oil left. What are you going to do? The DM asked, his voice betraying the hopelessness of our situation. If we fought, we'd die. If we run, we'd die. If we stood our ground, we'd die. Did we want to roll new characters? He apologetically suggested this was a very valid solution to what was clearly about to be a total party kill, since the rats were going to charge us any second. The consequence was a foregone conclusion as the wall of rats started creeping our way. I drop on all fours and start barking like a dog, I said. What? Asked the DM. I drop to my hands and knees and start barking and snarling and growling as loud as I can, and I start crawling in their direction. The DM paused. He rolled some dice behind his divider. He consulted a chart. He rolled some more dice. And then he opened his mouth and said, "The rats are confused." You hear a change in their volume and they come to a halt. Quickly, everybody, start barking! The elf dropped to his knees and started barking and howling. The dwarf would have none of this, but started shouting, banging his axe against the wall, and stamping his feet. The DM rolled and consulted his dice dubiously. The rats run away. They run into their warren of garbage and safely out of the dangerous dog's reach. We attack, I said. What? I, the spent level 1 wizard, continued barking and snarling, bear crawling towards the cowering rats in their haven of filth. When we reached the wall, I took the elf's flaming oil and doused the flammable trash as well as I could. Stepping back to admire my work, we all realized at once, none of us had a way to light the damn oil. Just then, our burglar appeared from the dark, somewhere, with flint and steel. He lit the oil on the first strike, raising a wall of flames between ourselves and the horrified rats unable to escape the conflagration. We ran out of the raging inferno, escaped the deadly rat encounter, and avoided suffocation on the black smoke billowing behind us. Back to town for training. Welcome to 2nd level. Now I have 2 magic missiles. Oh, that story is a delight. That one is a joy. The image I drew for this one, I wanted to draw the rat swarm. Frankly, because I don't draw a whole lot of rats and I wanted to practice, and because I think they're kind of fun. Like mouse shapes are very specific, but rat shapes you could play with, because rats are not pretty creatures. And if you have a pet rat or multiple pet rats, I would thank you not to come at me. If you would like the original art from that rat swarm, it'll be for sale at my website at coffeeandhate.biz. Click store at the top. In the meantime, thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and may your dice roll high and never be cursed. I'm nervous and you can tell because this is the 2nd or 3rd time that I'm trying this. Ow! The consequence was a foregone conclusion. As this rawl of wats. Okay.